Hello and welcome to the Avrum Rosensweig Show.
Welcome to one of the internet's best podcasts, where we dive deep into the lives of the extraordinary and fascinating people who leave an indelible mark on our world. Join us as we explore their captivating stories, remarkable achievements, and unique perspectives that shape history and inspire generations. Get ready to embark on a journey through the lives of inspiring people unlike any other.
Hello, folks, and welcome to the Avrum Rosensweig Show again. My name is Avrum Rosensweig, and I'm just delighted to be here with you, and I thank you so much for joining me, for listening, and for watching. The show really is all about paying homage to humankind through inspirational interviews. And I do that because I want to make sure that we all remember very clearly that the world in which we live, the world which we share, is truly magnificent. Yes, there are a lot of pockmarks. There's no question about that. A lot of dips and some ethical questions that we can all be challenged by or challenged. There's a lot of difficulties in our world, but we also have to look out our windows sometimes and just see the beauty that exists in our society, be it in a city, in a village, in a town, and what humankind has done together in order to create something very special, which we call Earth, which we call our world. Now, I am always mesmerized by people who are so positive in nature, who set about on their own personal journey with a smile on their face and an understanding of life as being actually, as I said, quite beautiful. My guest today, Wendy Holden, is one such person. I will tell you in a bit more length about who she is, but firstly, I'd like to welcome you, Wendy, and I'd like to commend you for that beautiful smile of yours, which is on your face constantly.
Thank you, Avram. It's very nice to be here, very grateful to be here, and happy to talk to you at any time.
Thank you. Thank you. Wendy Holden's The Teacher of Aushwitz is a poignant historical fiction novel inspired by a very true story of an individual by the name of Freddy Hirsch, who was a gay Jewish prisoner in Auschwitz and who risked everything to protect and educate children in the camp. The narrative follows Freddy, a dedicated and gifted educator, as he establishes a clandestine school within the harrowing confines of Auschwitz, teaching young prisoners resilience and survival amidst unimaginable brutality. The story vividly portrays the perilous challenges that Freddy faces, including tense negotiations with SS officers such as the notorious Joseph Mengele, to secure vital resources for the children. Wendy Holden, a best-selling author renowned for meticulously researched wartime biographies, brings emotional depth and historical authenticity to this very gripping tale. As I said a moment ago, I'm delighted to have her today, and I look forward to our schmooze, as they call it, our interview. So once again, thanks for joining me.
Thank you.
I talked about your positivity at the top of the show, and I'm always so excited when I meet somebody who sees life in a very beautiful way and appreciates the blessings that they have. And you've said that this comes from your parents. So tell us about your parents. Who was your mom? Who was your dad? What sort of people were they?
They were incredible people. My father had fought the Japanese in Burma because he was born in India, the son of British colonials, and he lived there for the first 27 years of his life. So he, of course, then fought for the Indian Army as a British officer, and he had lots of soldiers in his care. And he ended up in Burma in the intelligence corps. He was behind enemy lines for a long time. And he had a very difficult time. And interestingly, even though I'm a historian, a fellow of the Royal Historical Society, I found it very difficult to ask him questions about that and only did that once. But even then, although it was the only time I saw my father cry, even then he was able to put a positive spin on it and say that he had come out of the war alive when so many of his comrades hadn't and so many millions hadn't. And he was grateful for that. He met an English woman and married her, and very tragically, she died 8 months after they were married of typhoid. And he buried her in India and ended up in England, where he met my mother, who had lived in London during the London Blitz Her brother had had a terrible car accident, and the family had to live the consequences of that and the after effects of that on him. And tragically for her, her fiance was killed aged 18 parachuting into Holland as part of the British Paras. So these two people who had suffered great tragedy, great sadness, great upheaval, living through war as young people, got together, fell in love, and were together for almost 60 years of extremely happy marriage. The tragedies did continue for various reasons. They lost children and so on. But they adored each other. They used to sit holding hands, watching television right to the end of their days. And in the end, my mother sadly got dementia. My father was her carer. And when he died suddenly, I think partly of exhaustion, at 82, my mother followed him 12 weeks later. So even though that was a terrible thing to have lost them both so close together, and we adored them, all four children, when she joined him, when she died in hospital, we opened a bottle of champagne, which sounds really peculiar, but we were just so happy because all she wanted to be was back with Teddy, her beloved Teddy, and she was back with him, and it felt like everything had come full circle in a perfect sort of way. But they were the ones that instilled in me, in all of us, I think, a certain sense of optimism and positivity, and that no matter how difficult things can get in life, tomorrow is another day, and things will be better eventually.
So I'm curious how that plays out. You were a journalist for 18 years, and you were in war zones, so you saw the worst of humankind and how it affects people. Yet today, as we speak, you can see the world in a positive light. How does that work in your head, Wendy? How does it work in your head knowing how bad people can be to others, as in your novel, the SS towards the Jews, towards the homosexuals, towards the Roma? You've seen it
Yes.
up front, yet you have a positive outlook.
I do. I've always looked for the humanity in the inhumanity, both as a journalist and as a writer. And when given the choice, I have only ever written books that I would want to read and that I would want to be inspired by. And that's been a really important part of my ethos, because there is so much darkness in the world. But you just need one light to light that darkness, and no matter how small. And if I can do what I do what I love as a job, which is write books about incredible people, and then put them out into the world and light a little candle or a little spark in somebody else's darkness, then that really has become my raison d'etre. It has become the work that I do is so important to me now in that field.
There's an interesting little sort of vignette within Judaism, which says basically it talks about the Kaneka light, the holiday of Hanukkah around Christmas
Yes.
time. And it says, the beauty of fire, of a flame, is that you can take one little candle and you can light a million others.
Yes.
And the original candle and the flame is never diminished.
No, exactly right. And my parents proved all that to me. I knew how much they'd gone through. I knew what they'd suffered. And yet they remained optimistic. They remained charitable to other people, to those less fortunate than them. They were the least racist, least anti-Semitic people I ever met. They were really kind to everybody. They thought about people. They instilled in us all a sense of thoughtfulness, putting others before yourselves and walking in their footsteps. And I think that kind of kindness is a kind of vitamin, because it's self-perpetuating. If you're kind to somebody, if you see somebody in the street struggling and you help them across the street, or you push their trolley for them or their wheelchair or something, or even if you just smile at somebody and they smile back, it actually makes you feel good too. So I think it's self-perpetuating, and I think my positivity just keeps going round and round in me, and has been passed on, from my parents, and hopefully be passed on to other people, including my readers.
Do you have evidence that you are passing it on?
Oh, I get wonderful, wonderful comments from my readers. Gorgeous, messages and letters. Of course, I get people who don't like my work and who criticize it, and there'll always be that. And incidentally, by the way, those are the ones you can often remember more easily than the
100%. Yes, I
than the
know.
ones that remember. But when I get messages from, especially from other Holocaust survivors or the children and grandchildren of Holocaust survivors, when it comes to my World War II and Holocaust books, that to me means so much. It really is extraordinary to think that they've been moved and inspired by the story that I wrote about a time that I didn't live through, but which I have taken on as a kind of mantle.
I've interviewed a number of authors. I spent time with many authors. Recently, I started up a writers club because I'm really enamored by writers, who they are, what they do, and hopefully that'll encourage me to do more writing myself.
Yes.
But I find that people who write about the Holocaust or who write about Rwanda or Kampuchea, and I've met such people, they can often be melancholy folks, sometimes not. And what I'm curious about, Wendy, let's say in your case, as I said before, you've seen the worst of the worst. I'm assuming you've also seen the most hopeful of the hopeful. Is that right?
Absolutely. I mean, the stories that I've sought out are the epitome of hopeful, because even though there's terrible atrocities happening around the people that I write about, there is always that one glimmer. There's always that one gesture, the kindness of strangers, the courage of strangers. I wrote a book called Born Survivors about 3 young mothers who hid their pregnancies from the Nazis. And one story that struck me so powerfully in that was that in the town of Mauthausen in Austria, where the 3 pregnant women and their babies eventually were imprisoned, as the townspeople saw the prisoners coming up through the town, the station was at the bottom of the town, and the prisoners were marched up through the town to the concentration camp at the top of the hill, which was a granite quarry, a very, very bleak and dark place where the SS sent junior officers to learn how to be cruel. And this one woman, she was extraordinary. She worked in an office overlooking the station, and she saw these trains disgorging of humans, but she couldn't tell if they were men or women, shaven-headed in ragged clothing, being marched through the town, and nobody ever came back down. And there were terrible sounds from the camp at the top. So she decided to take it upon herself. She was a good Catholic housefrau, an Austrian housewife. And she took it upon herself to make a little hole in her pocket, and every lunchtime she went out and walked the route that she knew the prisoners would be taking, and she would drop a little piece of bread or a needle and thread or a pen and paper, a pencil and paper or something like that, just to give these prisoners coming up through the town some glimmer of hope, some glimmer of compassion. And it was such an incredibly amazing and brave and thoughtful thing for her to do. And she was caught and she was sent to Ravensbrück, even though she was a Catholic woman. And rather beautifully, she got very ill there with typhus, and she was saved by a Jewish doctor, which I love, that sort of full circle story. But if you were her neighbour and she had children and was married, and you knew that she had done that, and you saw the consequences for her and for her family, you wouldn't risk doing anything similar. So these stories that come out of the darkness, those little glimmers of hope and humanity, are the ones that really capture my attention. And I tell them because I hope that they inspire other people to be as glimmering.
Good word. Yeah, those stories are so moving, and there are so many of them. Every time I interview somebody, I just recently interviewed people from Rwanda, both the perpetrators and the victims, who actually eventually started to work together in a village created by an individual who lost 70 people during the genocide in 1994. But the stories do not go any higher in terms of hope and love and acceptance. But the thing that I wonder about, Wendy, perhaps you can help me with this, is you also know, at least literarily through research, Joseph Mengele, right? Where do you put that? Where do you put that darkness?
Well, it's very interesting, isn't it? Because he features in both Born Survivors and in The Teacher of Aushwitz, and briefly in another book I wrote called 100 Miracles. So he has been a thread through at least 3 of my books, and somebody who horrifies and fascinates me in equal measure in many ways. It's a very difficult thing to write about him. And in this book, as you read, he has two sides to him. And he has a side to him which is pure evil, where he stands at the top of the railway ramp and sends literally hundreds of thousands of people, men, women, and children, to the gas chambers to their deaths without even flinching. He's so dedicated to it that he even comes in on his day off to do it, because he doesn't trust his younger officers to do as good a job as he would in selecting those who are to be gassed and those who are to be chosen for slave labor, because they desperately needed slave labor. By the same token, he then comes into the children's block created by Freddy Hirsch, and he has sugar cubes in his pocket that are normally given to the SS horses, or sweets, and he scatters them on the floor and watches them run to them like little mice. And then he sits down and suggests some of them come and sit on his knee, and he calls himself Uncle Peppy. And somebody asked me recently in one of my interviews, how are you able to write about Mengele that he has a human side to him when he was pure evil? And my answer to that is, how much more evil can you be that you have those two sides to you? How can somebody who has just sent and watched children go to what he knows is going to be a horrific end, how can he then walk 50 steps into a children's block and play with children? That to me is more evil than somebody standing there at the railway ramp the entire time with devil's horns. So I don't have anywhere to put that, but I do have somewhere to try to explain it.
Is it more correct possibly to say then he does, not that he had two sides to him, but everything within him emanated from evil?
Yes, I mean, he intended to murder the children that he played with. He intended them all to die eventually. That was his plan. They didn't know it at the time, but that was his intention. So yes, I suppose it did come from that. But there was also a sense from the people who met him, who actually spent time with him, who had to deal with him on a daily basis. There was also a sense of him, I think, trying in some way to redeem himself. And that is a really curious trait in somebody who had no regrets after the war. When his son went and found him in Central and South America, he had no regrets what he'd done. His only regret was that he hadn't done more, and that he hadn't managed to keep all of his research documents, because he still believed he was going to be hailed as one of the world's finest geneticists. So it's a quandary, isn't it? It's a dilemma. One of the Holocaust survivors I wrote about, Anka, who was the mother, one of the three mothers of born survivors, it was the question that vexed her to the end of her days at 96. She wanted to know what made Mengele tick, because she was there. She saw him, and she saw him smile at all the naked women standing in parade ground in cold, wet clay with shaven heads, terrified. He saw them smile into their faces. He smiled into her face with a gap between his teeth, and he asked her, "Are you pregnant, pretty woman?" with a smile. And she did not know at that point whether to say yes, she was pregnant, or no, she wasn't, would save her and her unborn child. But she sensed instinctively that she was in the presence of danger, and she said no, which saved her life and the life of her unborn child. But she, having looked him in the eye on a daily basis, because those inspections were daily, it was her lifelong quest to try to find out more about him, to try and understand him. And I think there is no understanding of him. There is no understanding of him. You just have to tell what you know about him and let people decide for themselves.
Through your research, of which is extensive for all your novels, as I said before, you get to know the characters, one of whom is Mengele. Do you have ways and means of getting him out of your head when you need to?
Yes, I do. We live near the sea and we have two enormous dogs. And I've been married for a very long time, 44 years.
Yes,
and
congratulations, by the way. Yes.
My husband is very long suffering because he started out marrying a local newspaper reporter and ended up marrying somebody who focuses on the darkest aspects of life and who
Yeah.
spends at least 5 months of the year away from him. But my antidote is to be home. We have a small farm in Suffolk, England. We live near the sea. I love to swim. I swim in the sea all year if I can, and we walk the dogs, and nature and fresh air and the sea are all wonderful healing. Have all wonderful healing qualities for sure, but also the love and the support and the very, very good humour of the people that are around you. I have wonderful friends and I have a wonderful husband, and it's a privilege to be with them and back with them, and to be reminded that what is important every day, as you said at the beginning of this, is to find the everyday beauty in the world.
Oh, absolutely. I as a Jew, I was brought up on stories of the Holocaust. My father was a rabbi, my mother was a rebbitzin, therefore. And from an early age, be it in camp, be it in synagogue, there were programs that kids would often be exposed to about terrible things like being sought after by the Nazis. So this is in my DNA, that suffering I carry with me all the time as a Jew. I know many Holocaust survivors, and I've interviewed a lot of them. It's my people. It's who I am. It's what I live and breathe. You're not Jewish, right? You're not Jewish, and
No.
you never really follow the rituals of the Jewish people, as you've said. So, what is your relationship to the suffering of the Jews, in particular through the Holocaust? How do you integrate that into your psyche?
Well, my first book about the Holocaust was Born Survivors 10 years ago, so I'm relatively new to it, and I knew nothing of Jewish tradition. I didn't know anything about what the beliefs were, or the rituals and the traditions, and so that was an eye opener for me. And of course, I was working with the three miracle babies of Born Survivors, who are all 80 last month, incidentally, and are in very good fettle, who've now named me both their honorary sister and an honorary Jew.
Nice.
And I'm very happy to be both of those things. But I'm often asked, and actually when I'm in former Eastern Europe, is the question comes up most of all. I've been asked directly in a public setting, if you're not Jewish, why are you writing about Jews?
Mhm.
And I find that an extraordinary question, and I find it an extraordinary question once, never mind 20 times. But it's clearly something that perplexes or bothers people in some way. My answer is always the same. I'm writing about human beings. I'm writing about suffering. My parents had a great deal of suffering in their life, and it didn't matter that they were Church of England Christians. It didn't matter what their race or creed was. Suffering, it doesn't take sides. And so I have never felt that it was anything other than life for humanity. I mean, very unfortunately, there's always going to be cruelty. There's always going to be evil, and it doesn't matter whether it's because of your race, religion, creed, or the color of your eyes. I certainly know that from covering wars. So I think my answer to you, really, rather long-winded answer, is to say that I identify with anybody who suffered, and I identify with the tragedy of that. I identify very strongly with it. I've always felt a great affinity with the stories of the Holocaust since teenage years, and read a great deal about it even then, never imagining that I would end up writing about it. So I have a deep understanding of it, but my understanding of it and my respect for it comes from my parents and my families and my witnessing other suffering.
Wendy, before we dive into the novel, this is a question I ask many of my guests, and I'm always very curious as to how they approach the answer, especially if they're not Jewish. Why are the Jewish people hated so much?
That's a big question, Avrum. It's a big question. I don't know, is the answer. I simply don't know. I suppose I spend a lot of time talking in schools. It's a really important part of my work. And one of the things I talk about most of all is, apart from compassion and tolerance and understanding, and it's always, my schools talks are always to do with the Holocaust and my Holocaust books. But it's about respecting difference, isn't it? And difference makes people afraid. And as soon as somebody is different, whether they wear a veil and only have their eyes showing when they walk down the street, or whether they have a skull cap on and have different traditions, different ways and means of being together, and not necessarily always assimilating into the community in the ways that other people who live there do, then whenever that difference is noted by some people, they become afraid. And as we all know, fear turns to anger very often. So I can only ever answer that by saying I think it is a fear of difference. And what do you do about that? We can't all be the same, and thank goodness we're not.
Have you been the recipient of anti-Semitism?
I have. I have. I've been the recipient of anti-Semitism on my social media pages because I write and post about my books, and people either assume I'm Jewish or they don't care. They still just say terrible things to me, but I don't engage with them. I delete them and move on. And in public, I've been confronted by Holocaust deniers. Again, I move quickly on and don't engage. And in person in a couple of places in Eastern Europe, where I've been asking directions to a synagogue or a Holocaust museum, where I have meetings arranged with people that I need to speak to for my research. There's been a shift in atmosphere or a shift in attitude towards me, and it's taken my breath away a couple of times. I thought, my goodness me, all my life I've been, a white middle-class woman, and I've never experienced that. And when the first few times I experienced it, I felt so deeply for anybody who experiences anti-Semitism and racism in any form, because I've been very privileged not to.
Do you get frightened of people?
No.
You don't?
No. I mean, when I'm with the babies, I always make sure we've got extra security for sure.
Yes.
Because I think they could be more of a target than anything else. And I mean, I'm very, very painfully aware that it's because of me that they go around the world and talk about the book and so on. So I'm always very aware of extra security for them and make sure there is extra security for them. But when I'm on my own, no. No, I was a war correspondent. Nothing frightens me. The only thing in the world that frightens me is spiders, which is ridiculous.
Is your husband a courageous man?
Yes, well, he's courageous for marrying me, I think, and courageous for staying with me all these years. He says the reason we're happily married is because I spent 20 years away from him, and I think there's a great deal of truth in that.
Right.
But
distance makes the heart grow fonder. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. But he does get to come with me. I'm going to America next week to launch the book in America, and he's coming with me for that. And he does get to join me on a few of my trips, which makes it a nice trip for him as well.
I was going to say, when you're joined by a loved one on such a trip, and we'll talk about those dates later on, it makes it so much nicer, doesn't it?
Yes and no, Avrum. Honestly, sometimes it's a nuisance because I have a very busy schedule. I've got meetings from 10 till 5 o'clock, 6 o'clock, then it's drinks, then it's dinner. And he's often not included in that, obviously, because it's about me and my work and everything. So if I'm on my own, I'm just get on with it. I know that he's sort of waiting for me in the hotel to see what time I'm going to be back. It's an additional thing to think about. So,
I love your honesty.
Well, I'm a rather selfish person in many ways, and so when it comes to my work, I hear you. I like to just get on with it.
The fascinating thing about people whose minds are wide open, whose eyes are always looking about and trying to find new things, is that they trip over treasures and gems very often, right? You're mentioning about walking in the street and smiling to people. Well, what happens if that person stops and starts to talk to you, and you find out a fantastic story about that man or at that woman? In that light, your discovery of Freddy Hirsch, the main character in the novel, came through an interview, a discussion that you had with Susanna Cohen. Also an amazing person. God bless her soul. Tell us about that.
Yes, well, after the success of Born Survivors, a literary agent asked me if I would go and meet with Susanna Ruzishkova. It took me about a year and a half to learn how to say that properly.
Yes.
Ruzishkova. And she was in Prague, and she was at that point, I think, 89 when I first met her. And she had survived 3 camps. She was a teenage musical prodigy. She was destined to go to Paris to train with Wanda Landowska, who was a brilliant harpsichordist and pianist in Paris, who hid her Jewish identity from the Nazis, amazingly, until she was able to escape. And she was very spoilt. Susanna was an only child. She was very spoilt. She was loved and adored by her parents. And then Hitler came and the Nazis came to Czechoslovakia. And they first went into the Terezin ghetto and then on to Auschwitz. And she ended up in Bergen-Belsen, very close to death. So was her mother. And when she emerged from all these different dreadful, dreadful experiences, her hands were, she had no fingerprints left because she'd been forced to do slave labor in Hamburg in Germany with burning rubble, moving burning rubble with bare hands. Her fingers were almost fossilized. And when she returned to Pilsen with her mother and discovered that everybody in the family was dead and their family home had been taken over, all their belongings were gone, they had absolutely nothing, she attempted suicide. But her mother found her in time and sent her to a psychiatrist who told her that she must continue with her music because music had saved her in the camps. She said she was passionate about Johann Sebastian Bach. And she said as long as there was music in the world, then there was still some beauty in the world. And it was the one thing they couldn't take away from her because she kept the music in her head. So she retrained, she went back to grade 1 piano and ended up becoming one of the world's leading Baroque musicians. She switched to harpsichord because she discovered that Bach had only really composed for organ and harpsichord. Piano wasn't invented then, and she wanted to be true to him. And even under communist rule for 4 decades, she suffered. She suffered antisemitism, and she suffered in all sorts of other ways. They sent her around the world to perform and took 80% of her income and kept her husband, who was a Gentile, and her mother hostage in Prague so that she wouldn't defect. But she was an amazing woman. And in all the months I spent with her in her apartment in Prague, which were very harrowing times for her, she wasn't well, but she was okay. I mean, we went out every day for lunch and she smoked like a chimney. But through all that time, it was quite a somber mood, as you can imagine, her telling me all of this. But suddenly she mentioned the name Freddy Hirsch, and it was as if a light bulb went on inside her. Her whole face lit up. She was just immediately full of life and light and laughter, and held her hand to her chest and said, "Freddy Hirsch, the most beautiful man I ever saw."
Yeah.
And she had first encountered him in the Terezin ghetto when she had arrived there with her family and seeing the terrible conditions that they would be living in. She had fainted. And when she came to, Freddy Hirsch was standing over her with some smelling salts. And she looked up into his eyes and kind of fell in love a little bit, I think, at 14. And then he employed her in the homes that he set up in Terezin. And when he got sent to Auschwitz, she was also sent to Auschwitz not long after. And again, she worked for him there. And she adored him, absolutely adored him. And on her desk were 3 photographs, one of her mother, one of her father, and one of Freddy Hirsch. And when I was talking to her about him, I realized that he had given her some of the happiest moments of her entire life in Auschwitz. And I had to know more about him. So I started to look elsewhere, and I looked a lot of Shoah Foundation videos because most of the children who had been working with him and been in the children's homes he set up were no longer with us. But I did have the access to the Shoah Foundation videos of them. And one by one, every single one of them had exactly the same reaction when they talked about Freddy. They just went from sad or crying to suddenly, Freddy Hirsch. And I thought, who was he? Who was this young man? I absolutely had to know more.
So let's give a little bit of background. I do want to add, a number of years ago, I interviewed a woman who was 106 years old. And 2 weeks after I interviewed her, she passed away. And I felt as though I had given her a wonderful legacy. Hopefully that's correct in terms of her story being recorded. Did you feel that same way about Susanna? Because you interviewed her on a Friday and she passed away on a Tuesday.
Yes, I finished interviewing her on the Friday and was going back to London from Prague, and I was going to be writing the book basically and coming back in March to go through it with her and
Yeah,
see if I got
yeah.
everything right. And as I was leaving, she said, she sort of held, she was a tiny little woman, she sort of held my shoulders and looked up at me and she said, "Do you have everything you need?"
Yeah.
And I said, "Oh, yes, I think I do, Susanna, thanks so much." And she said, "Do you have everything you need?"
Yes.
And there was just a clench. My heart was clenched, and I said, "I think so, yes." And she said, "Good." And she died on the Tuesday. And I knew that she hadn't been well. She did have cancer, but she was doing really well, and that wasn't expected at all. But her family said she stayed alive long enough to tell me her story. And one of the last things she said to me before I did leave the apartment was, "Please one day tell Freddy's story." And I dedicate this book to her because I would never have known about him if she hadn't talked about him so glowingly.
Did you love her?
I adored her. Absolutely adore. I've adored them all. And the sad part of my work is that very often I lose them not long afterwards. I just lost 2 weeks ago Martha Cohen, who died at 106 in California.
I'm
And
sorry.
she was a Jewish spy, a remarkable woman. And it of course it's expected when they get to that sort of age. You can't not expect it. But there's still a hole. I'm just so grateful that and honoured to have had the privilege of getting to know them and to write their stories and to put their stories out in the world so that they will never be forgotten.
Did you memorialize her?
Yes, in many ways. Well, in the book, I think, really.
The book is called The Teacher of Aushwitz. And the main character in the book is Freddy Hirsch. His story begins with Freddy's childhood in Germany in 1916. He was born to Jewish parents. From a young age, Freddy stands out, rejecting his father's path as a butcher or his brother's religious aspirations. Instead, he is drawn towards sports, drama, and the outdoors, dreaming of competing in the Olympics. His early experiences with antisemitism teach him resilience. As a wise teacher advises him to stand up to hatred to diminish its power. How would you qualify who Freddy Hirsch was, Wendy?
A beacon of light, a beacon of hope, somebody who was unremarkable in every other way. He had an ordinary, rather sad, tragic childhood. His father died when he was 10, which was devastating. His mother all but abandoned him and went off to traveling for a year, I think, and came back with a different husband. He didn't particularly get on with. And he found solace in nature, which I totally identified with. He found solace in the great outdoors, and he found solace in the Scout movement. He joined the Jewish Scouts, and he discovered, almost to his surprise, I think, that he had an ability to mentor younger people, the young men and women, girls and boys and girls in his charge. And the fact that he discovered himself and then at that particular time, just before the earth started burning, gave him a reason to go on, no matter what he endured and what he faced in the coming years of the war. By focusing on the needs of the children, he was able to get through it. That, I think, was true. It was his redemption. It was his way of forgetting what was actually possibly going to happen to him and trying his best to save as many children as he could. And to have come from that ordinary background and become that person, which he might not have become, who knows, if he hadn't been put in those circumstances, then he became a hero. And he became a hero to so many, and definitely a hero to me.
How does that happen with people, where they can either go through door one or door one is open for them and they end up being a butcher like his dad wanted him to do, which is fine. No criticism of butchers, or that door two he's pushed through it. Yeah. And he evolves into an amazing, soulful human being.
I'm fascinated by the nature of courage and, hero or coward. And even the mothers and born survivors, they were very privileged young Jewish women with everything ahead of them. One was studying law, one was very wealthy, from a very wealthy mill family, and the other was going to be a teacher and a professor of languages, all very comfortable. And they ended up not being Jewish housewives with lots of children and, maybe doing a bit of charitable work in their life. They ended up becoming these incredibly brave, courageous, resilient women because of the situations they were forced into. And I've seen it in my work as a war correspondent and just as a journalist too, generally, that when faced with difficult circumstances, people very often rise to the occasion and display qualities and attributes that they didn't even know they had. And it's only when we're faced with these things, we all know that, we're faced with illness, we're faced with bereavement, we're faced with loss, we're faced with things that before they happen, we can't imagine we could ever possibly get through them. But we do. And we not only get through them, we emerge from that with something new. We emerge with something that we can pay forward to other people and that we can use for our own good mental health, really.
Excuse me. So Freddy is put in Theresienstadt, which is a ghetto. But the story shifts to Auschwitz in 1943, where he and other Jews arrived from Theresienstadt via cattle wagons. The brutal reality of the camp, marked by selections, gas chambers, and crematoria, set a grim background. Freddy's arrival at Auschwitz marks a critical turning point as he confronts the full horror of the Holocaust while maintaining his commitment to protecting others. So, Wendy, Freddy arrives in Auschwitz, and like everybody else, he looks around. He sees the evil of Joseph Mengele, the selections. People quickly get to know what that smell is. It's burning bodies from the crematoria. Tell us about his first days in Auschwitz, when he determines that he's going to step up to help the children.
Well, he'd never really stopped stepping up from when he was a leader in the Scouts in Aachen in Germany, and then the Scouts were disbanded because Jewish Scouts weren't allowed. He moved sideways. He went to other places and he carried on his work under other guises. And when that got too untenable in Germany, he fled to Czechoslovakia thinking that was far enough, and it wasn't. But immediately threw himself into working with child refugees who had also fled to Czechoslovakia. It was the closest safe place for them to go to, one of the closest safe places, and thousands came. And in Czechoslovakia, he committed himself to finding ways to, as one of his the children in his care wrote, to build a wall against suffering in their hearts. And it's a wonderful expression, because he realized that they were banned from swimming pools, they were banned from having bicycles, they were banned from public parks, they were banned from cinemas, they couldn't have any education. If they wanted to go from one part of town to the other part of town, instead of taking the direct route, if it went through any of those places they weren't allowed to, they weren't allowed on the trams. They had to do a circuitous route, which took very, very long time. And he realized that what they needed was what he had found as a great comfort and solace to him, which was exercise and being outdoors. And so he set up a playground, really, in the northeast of Prague, called the Hagibor. He managed to somehow get permission to be there, and he managed to get thousands of children there on a regular basis to do games, sports, athletics, kinesthetics. If you couldn't, you weren't very sporty, you could play chess, or you could help look after the younger children. And they were fed and they were nurtured and they were encouraged, and they felt, for that one day a week, they felt safe. They were there surrounded by their people. There were no Nazis, there were no SS soldiers, there was nobody jeering at them or saying terrible things about them. And they had this little haven. And so he was chosen because of that work. The Jewish elders chose him to be one of what they called the pioneers, to go into the Theresienstadt ghetto, Terezin, and help establish, as the youth leader, games and things for the children there as well. And he quickly looked around and realized that the children in the barracks were really causing a nuisance to the adults. They were They felt trapped, they felt cramped. It was a very cramped space. It was noisy, it was smelly, it was airless. They didn't have access to fresh air. They didn't have anywhere they could play. And he chose at a very early age, and I'm talking probably 22, 23 years old, he chose to confront the SS commanders of that ghetto and ask them for extra privileges for the children. He wanted them to be allowed outside onto the ramparts. It's a sort of castellated, fortified town, is Terezin. And he wanted them to be allowed to go out and play and in the fresh air. But he was so clever because even at that age, he figured out several things. He was inspired by an uncle who had a very elegant Prussian bearing, they called it. He was tall, he was erect, he dressed beautifully. And Freddy was very much inspired by that, and he tried to instill that into the children that he taught. He was also very beautiful. He was planning and hoping to be an Olympian, but of course that hope was dashed along with all the others. But he knew that the Germans, he was German, respected somebody who spoke High German, somebody who looked physically beautiful, almost Aryan, they said. They said if he hadn't been Jewish, he'd have made a marvelous member of the SS. And they respected somebody who had courage. So he would go up to them, he would look them straight in the eye, he would click his heels together, he would salute them, and then he would make his demands. And he realized very early on that it was they were either going to pull out a pistol and shoot him dead there and then, or they were going to respond. And time and again they responded. So by the time he was sent to Auschwitz, and he took one look around during that first awful, dreadful roll call where they all have to stand for hours and hours and hours, 4,000 people being counted one by all these German soldiers. And then if they miscounted, start all over again. So it could go on for 3-4 hours standing in that dreadful cold, wet clay on a windy plain in Poland. The children didn't understand that, the little children. They were running between legs. They were tugging on the breeches of soldiers. They were being a flipping nuisance to everybody. And so he confronted Mengele. He confronted the commandants. And he said, listen, let me take the children. There's an empty block at the end, block 31. Let me take the children into there. I will do the roll call. I'll give you the numbers every day. They can sleep in the barracks, girls with the mothers, boys with the fathers. And then in the morning, they can come to me. You give me food, I'll feed them. I will have roll call with them. And hey, guess what? I'll teach them German so they better understand your commands. And I'll teach them military marches and things so that if ever we have to move out, they'll march okay. And they'll know what to do when it comes to addressing you as a German officer. And they thought, you know what? These children are a nuisance. That's not a bad idea. Okay, you can have it. And of course, once he got one privilege, he pushed and pushed and pushed and pushed and got more and more. And before anybody knew it, there were Disney cartoons on the walls. And he had teachers coming in and teaching them. And they put on little plays and musicals that the SS themselves came in to watch, moist-eyed with memory. I mean, it was an extraordinary thing. How did he have the courage to do that? But it was incremental, I suppose. It started in Terezin. It started in Prague, actually, and then moved to Terezin. And by the time he came to Auschwitz, I suppose he felt he had nothing left to lose.
Yeah. I'm breathless just to hear you speak about it.
Yeah. I mean, he cannot fail to inspire you. You know, he's just the most incredible young man who chose not to be a bystander to hate, who chose not to be a bystander to evil. In those places, the most sensible thing to do was to keep your head down. When you walk past an officer, keep your head down. Yeah. No eye contact. Do not draw attention to yourself in any way. Just be one of the grey people, one of the crowd, a ribbon of misery, somebody described them. Prisoners walking through, being marched in line through the camp, a grey ribbon of misery. And that's how you were meant to be. You were just meant to be faceless, nameless. They'd taken all identity from them, and they were just meant to do nothing. So to step out of that ribbon, to stand there, to look them in the eye, to confront them, to face them, was just remarkable. Absolutely remarkable.
Did you fall in love with Freddy?
Yes, I did. I really did. I feel very, very close to him. And my husband says I become almost everybody I write about. So I would love to think that I have some of Freddy's courage. I've inherited some of Freddy's courage and his positivity. He taught them meditation.
Yeah.
I mean, we think of that as being such a modern thing, but he taught them self-hypnosis, he taught them meditation, he made them lie quietly, close their eyes and imagine that their bellies were full and that they weren't afraid. He invented games for them, like freeze, which we all played as children. You run as fast as you can and then somebody says freeze and you have to freeze. But he did it specifically with one thing in mind, that when the Allies came, and of course they believed they were going to come any day because the planes were constantly flying overhead, and the Russians were getting closer on one side, the Americans on the other, and they could hear shelling in the distance in some instances. He believed that when that happened, there would be a chance, he hoped, to get the children out of the camp, past the electrified barbed wire fences, out into the woods, and wait there for the Allies to come and save them. And he knew that they would almost certainly be hunted down by the Germans, and he was doing this with a view to getting the children to freeze, to be quiet in huge numbers so that they wouldn't be discovered. So he was constantly plotting and planning and thinking ahead about what would happen and how he would be able to help them in the future. Unbelievable for a man so young, without any remarkable education or anything, and no father figure, and a mother he didn't particularly like. I mean, I think he was unique.
What is that, Wendy? What is that?
Unique?
Where does that come from?
Well, if you were religious, you'd say God, I suppose. If you weren't, you would say it comes from necessity, resilience, human resilience. I'm always amazed by the resilience of the human spirit.
Yeah, me too.
I come across it time and again. And so his individuality, his uniqueness, his courage came from that, I think, from having to be. Although there were plenty who should have stepped up and didn't and couldn't. They couldn't face it. They weren't able to. Yeah.
Dr. Janusz Korczak is well known amongst many for really being the father of children's democracy, if you will, but more so, he started an orphanage in Warsaw before and during the war to take care of Jewish children, and otherwise, eventually his children were marched to the gas chambers, and he had the choice given by the SS not to go, and he went together with his children and was killed. His spirit, his body went up in flames. Did you step over, if you will, Dr. Janusz Korczak while you were studying Freddy?
Oh, I knew all about him already. I knew about him years ago. I'd read all about him and was amazed by him and inspired by him. Extraordinary people. So many of these amazing stories. And once you start to, I mean, I was always interested in the Holocaust, as I said, from my teens. So I'm an avid reader, so I've read many books about it anyway. But once you start writing about it, of course, people send you books and tell you about books, and you go down a rabbit hole, really. So yes, then there are still stories out there that have never been told. I mean, Freddy's story was never really told. It's never been told in English before. There's been a sort of Czech thesis, I think, and a German sort of script, but it's never been told in English before. And I mean, what a privilege. What an extraordinary thing to think that 80 years on, I came across it, and 70 years on I came across it, and that was able to finally write about him and bring his name to the world. And I was going to read from the prologue. I don't know if this is now the appropriate time to do that.
Yeah, in 1 second, I would love to hear it because it's magnificent what you wrote. But before we do that, Freddy was not only a Jew, but he was also gay. Yes. I wasn't quite clear whether he was openly gay or he hid that. Which one was it, and how did that play out in the camp?
Well, the difficulty, and this is one of the reasons why I chose to write it as fiction in the end, because originally I planned to write it as a non-fiction biography. That was my intention, and all my research was leading that way. And then because I couldn't get under his skin, I couldn't really figure out that side of him and various other sides of him as well. There wasn't enough archive material. Understandably, because why would there be? It's not something that's written down, what your sex life is or your sexuality or anything of a personal nature in that way. But it was really important to me. I was aware that he did have lovers, and I was aware that was definitely factual and that was definitely written down. But I couldn't, and I even had a couple of names, but there was nothing more than that. And that's when I switched to fiction. And I was very painfully aware, as a historian, that to do so would potentially open me to criticism, because we shouldn't embellish the Holocaust in any way. It's enough in its own way. But every single fictional character that I have created to support Freddy's story is based on some incidents of truth. So the research is clear in the back of the book. I list all the fictional characters alongside all the true life characters so that people understand. But even a simple periphery character that I have put into is based on some truth. And I've been able to just bring them to life a little bit to help with the structure and to help with the flow. So as for his sexuality, what I was able to verify historically, I was able to draw upon and to develop more into a relationship, two relationships primarily, that he had. And it's an important part of who he was, and I think it was a very important part of how he, in many ways, it further informs his courage, because he was in double jeopardy. He was in double jeopardy as a Jew and as a homosexual. And the fact that he was prepared to even risk that in the ghetto and the camp was extraordinary too. But I also am happy for him. I'm glad for him. I'm glad that he found some comfort somewhere. I'm glad that he had somebody caring for him, looking out for him. And that was an important aspect of it. But it didn't affect my opinion of him one way or the other, and it doesn't impact on the overall story in any detrimental way, in my view. I feel that it only adds layers of intrigue and individuality and courage to what he did.
Is your gladness the same as it would be for someone today? You said you were glad for him, and I understand your point. Is that really palpable, your gladness, as it would be for me, as an example of something happened in my life today? Do you feel his real existence? He's not just a fictional character to you.
No, well, he isn't a fictional character. He did.
No, he's not. Yeah.
Yes, and he did have a relationships, and I'm glad for anybody who has somebody who loves them, and somebody to love. I mean, we need more of that in the world, and to find some sort of joy in that way, love, physical attraction, whatever, in a place like that was so important. I mean, the three mothers were pregnant by their husbands from born survivors, and one of them got pregnant in Terezin by her husband, because they assumed and believed absolutely 100% that the war would be over very soon. And they risked it, and it was an enormous risk. And Anka, Eva's mother, was pregnant first with a little boy, and when the Nazis found out she was pregnant, they made her sign a form that said they would euthanize the baby when it was born. And she didn't even know what the word euthanize meant. What they meant was they would murder it. And he was born. He was called Yuri, and he died a very, very small baby from pneumonia. So that never happened. But other mothers and babies were sent to Auschwitz and gassed. So the fact that she was able to be with her husband, who she lost in the end, and spend time with him, and then get pregnant again by him with Eva, ended up being a miracle. Because had she arrived at Auschwitz when she was going to be sent to Auschwitz anyway, with Yuri in her arms, she'd have gone straight to the gas chambers. But she arrived in Auschwitz 2 months pregnant, but it didn't show yet. And that saved both her and her baby. So love wins, right?
Love wins. You have a magnificent spirit, you do, Wendy. Magnificent. Really.
I owe that entirely to my parents.
I really like you.
Thank you. I like you too.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. Wendy is coming to the United States of America, and she has a book tour which starts on June the 19th in Illinois at the Holocaust Museum in Skokie. R.J. Julia's bookstore in Madison on June 23rd. The La Grua Art Center in Stonington, Connecticut, June 28th, and the New York Museum of Jewish Heritage in New York City on July 15th. Wendy Holden, what would you say Freddy Hirsch's greatest legacy is?
Be kind. It was my father's maxim. It's something that's on the wall of my office. It says, just be kind. Think of others. I think kindness is everything. And it's certainly something we need more of in the world. And from kindness comes so many other things. Love, passion, compassion, thoughtfulness, courage. But if your heart is kind, if you intend to be kind to somebody, if you wake up with the intention of being kind every day, that's a really good start.
Agreed. There's such an overlap between your characters and your novels and who you are as a human being. I see that the more you and I talk. I'm just curious what your husband means when he says you become the characters you write about.
Yes, well, I suppose he means that I've become so immersed in them that I feel that I almost am them for a while, because I'm writing very often in the first person,
Yes.
as if I am them. And so that's, I suppose, one of the reasons why I choose these kind, humane, compassionate people, because in my heart, that's who my parents forged me to be.
So did you become Freddy?
I did become Freddy for a while. I think I still am.
How so?
I think while I'm still talking about him on an almost daily basis and traveling the world, I'm thrilled to be in his company. I'm thrilled to be in his company. He's somebody, why wouldn't you want to be in his company?
Yes.
And you know what? One of the things that there are a few pictures of him, not that many, but there are a few. But one of the things that, or somebody, I think maybe 3 or 4 different survivor testimonies that I witnessed, and also from Susanna, they all said he had the most incredible smile. He said his eyes lit up and his face lit up, and you couldn't help but smile back at him. Well, that's something I identify with, because when I was a child, I was known as Smiler.
Yeah, you have a great smile. Do you dream of Freddy? Do you dream about him?
I have dreamt about him, and it's a much nicer thing to dream about than the other aspects of the Holocaust, which I also sometimes dream about. So Freddy's welcome anytime in my dreams.
Has he thanked you? Has he said anything to you?
I don't know. It's funny. I have his whistle here. I use it sometimes. I found this on the internet. It was almost exactly the same whistle that he used to rally the children. I'm going to blow it, but hold your ears.
Yeah.
That's very mildly. And this hangs off my lamp on my desk, so that there's always a little bit of Freddy with me. And I don't know, sometimes when I'm writing about him or talking about him, I just like to hold it in my hand.
Yes.
And just feel as if he's here with me. I think he'd be happy. I think he'd be really happy that people hadn't forgotten him. And I think it's a wonderful, wonderful gift to me to be able to do that, to make people remember who he is.
Well, you followed his instructions, or his request was, please remember my name, right?
Yes. Yeah.
Can you read the prologue?
I will.
Thank you.
Gladly. My name is Alfred Hirsch, although my friends call me Freddy. Please be so kind as to remember my name. The word Hirsch means stag in German, and like a deer, I've been on the run for much of my life. Today, the hunting of Freddy Hirsch may end in a kill. I'm not afraid for myself, but for the children in my care. They are all I've focused on since the world started burning, and I shudder to think what might become of them. My name is Freddy Hirsch. I'm 28 years old. I'm a teacher. I'm a dreamer. I'm not just a number, nor will I be identified by the yellow triangle I've been forced to wear. My name is Freddy Hirsch, and I fought to maintain a vestige of normality and decency in this hellish world. I have loved and laughed, cried and almost died 1,000 times. My name is Freddy Hirsch. I'm a good man. Please be so kind as to remember my name.
When did you write that?
The first thing I wrote.
Very first thing?
Very first thing.
Did everything follow from that?
Yes, it was it was a difficult book to write, but it was an easy book to write because I felt like I knew him. It had taken me a lot of years and a lot of research to get to that point. But once I started, I couldn't stop. I absolutely felt that I knew him.
You are very lucky, very lucky in so many ways.
I know, and I count my blessings every day.
I've been playing around with AI over the last few months and asking AI to write odes or poems about my guests. So I now have an ode to Wendy Holden.
How exciting. I'm so excited. I can't wait to hear it.
It is exciting. Hopefully you like it.
I'm sure I will.
In Suffolk's quiet, where the heart finds peace, Wendy Holden weaves tales that never cease. With pen as her torch, she lights the past, crafting stories where hope and truth hold fast. The Teacher of Aushwitz, her latest art, breathes life to Freddy Hirsch's boundless heart, a man who stood where shadows darkly creep to shield the children in his tender keep. Through archives deep, her research carves away from survivors' lips their truth she conveys. In a hut of cartoons where despair was banned, Freddy taught young souls to dream. He taught them to stand. Wendy's words like murals brightly bloom, defying the weight of a death camp's gloom. With love and courage, her pages sing of a hero's fight, of the hope that he'd bring. From born survivors to this tale's embrace, she honors the brave who faced that place. Through prose that ache with a tender grace, Wendy ensures Freddy's name finds space. In history's scars, she finds the light, a novelist's craft both fierce and bright. For Wendy Holden, with her storyteller's art, keeps alive the pulse of the human heart.
Oh, that almost made me cry. Thank you.
I know. I feel like crying too.
Good. Well, we should cry. We should cry.
Do you cry very much?
I cry when I'm writing. I cry. If I'm in the company of somebody who cries, I cry. I've got wonderful, what they call mirror neurons in my brain that just reflect back somebody's happiness and somebody's sadness.
Do you sob? Do you sob?
Oh, I've sobbed. I've almost ruined the computer because I've sobbed over my keyboard so much. For sure. But, if we can't cry about these stories, when are we going to cry?
No,
I feel that if I feel it deeply enough, then my readers will feel it deeply enough when they're reading it too.
And do you still laugh your head off?
All the time. I'm going out for dinner tonight. I'm going to be laughing my head off. I'm going to have a large martini and get out there and live life to the full.
What kind of martini?
Oh, I like an apple martini, actually. I think I'll have an apple martini tonight. Yeah.
Good for you. Make sure not to drive home.
Oh, no, I've got my designated driver.
Ladies and gentlemen, I want to thank everybody for watching, for listening. As I often do at the end of my interviews, I like to bring you sort of a synopsis, what we can take away from any interview, or this interview in particular. And I would just say that this one is all about hope, and it's all about positivity, and it's all about a beautiful, beautiful smile from a woman who really delves into some of the most difficult times in history and finds the gems within those times. And that's a tough thing to do. It's very difficult to do. I know within my community now, the Jewish community, there's a lot of feelings of melancholy and a lot of very sad, downtrodden people. But the truth of the matter is the hope and the stories that are coming out of this time are so incredibly beautiful, so incredibly encouraging. I just attended the exhibit for the Nova Music Festival, where over 350 young people were murdered on October 7th. And I have to tell you something. I listened to a speaker at the end of it by the name of Ella, and she's 24 years old, and she lost 6 friends on that day. And I went over and I spoke to her later, and she was gorgeous. She was beautiful of spirit. Her eyes were just shining with hope for her future. And she had to go through a lot of rehabilitation to work through the emotional scars, but she's doing it. And that's humankind. Yeah. That's the inimitable spirit of us, which we share. Wendy, do you want to concluding words?
Well, Freddy, when he was teaching the children who weren't allowed to be in the Scouts anymore, he was trying to get them to not be melancholy and not to lose hope in the future, because they loved going to the Scouts and it was going to be a terrible thing. And he said, well, we'll still meet and we'll still do our athletics in the park. And what we will do is prove them wrong. We'll show them that we are good, strong, proud people, and we will prove them wrong. So let's make the best of ourselves, and let's go out every day and try and do a good deed every day. And he instilled that in them to the point that even in their 80s and 90s, they remembered that, and they said that they took that ethos forward throughout their lives.
Wendy Holden, thank you so much for being with me. I really appreciate it a lot. Thank you.
I did too. Thank you for having me.
An absolute honor. Ladies and gentlemen, until we meet again, as they say in Yiddish, sei gesinnt. Do you speak Yiddish at all, Wendy?
And not that, no. Very
No. It means go in good health. Until we meet again, I appreciate everybody joining us and listening. We'll see you again soon. Thank you so much.
Thank you.